Well, good afternoon. I'm Rick Dancer, or good evening, I guess I should say. I'm Rick Dancer. Welcome to Get Real with Rick Dancer. We have a show tonight that I'm really excited to bring you because it's something I've been working on for quite a while, several weeks. I'm a property owner along the McKenzie River. When the wildfires happened, it just scared the hell out of us. And the first time I drove up the McKenzie River, I cried. My wife and I just sat in the car, and it wasn't really crying. It was more like a weeping, because so much of the beauty and the timber and the vegetation and the homes and everything was destroyed. And we've heard a lot about the homes and the destruction, and we're going to be doing more tomorrow. Locals helping locals. Mary Ellen, my new buddy, is coming on the show, and we're going to tell you how you can raise money to help buy gifts for all the kids up at the school who've been displaced from their homes and stuff for Christmas and stuff. So we're going to do a big show on that tomorrow. So we're doing tons to help the people, but I'm really concerned about how we as a community and as a state handle the repair and the renewal of an amazing resource that we all take for granted. I think sometimes we don't understand how much all those trees do for each and every one of us. So we brought some folks in who are experts in the industry, and we're going to just have a conversation because I think there's some things that you're going to learn tonight that maybe you've never heard about before, like how important trees are even when they're dead. And they're still doing things. They're doing some very important things. So we're bringing on, I'm going to let people introduce themselves, but this is Casey, and here's Kevin, and this is Nick, and this is Shelly. So how do you like that, people? I'm throwing a party. We're having a timber party. So let's start. Nick, can we start with you? So Nick is the Executive Director of Healthy Forests, Healthy Communities. Tell people what that's all about, what that is.
Thanks, Rick. We advocate for active forest management on our federal lands, both to educate the public and the policymakers about the very serious risk to our public forest lands, and more importantly, the solutions that are out there to reduce the risks of wildfire, to protect our communities, and to make sure that our federally owned forests are places that we can continue to enjoy, and that they continue to provide a multitude of benefits well into the future.
So Nick, what is your biggest concern right now? Because when I'm driving up, let's just take the McKenzie. We have the Archie Creek fire. We have the fire down by Ashland. We have one up by Estacada. There's a number of fires. How many total acres burned?
Well over 1 million acres, the size of Rhode Island, just to give you a comparison. And, one thing that, I would really like your viewers to understand is that, a lot of the serious risks to our natural landscapes are on federally owned forests. Over 60% of our forested land base here in Oregon are controlled by the federal government. 86% of the forested acres that have burned in Oregon have been on federal lands. And so, the positive story that I want to tell is that there are things that we can and should be doing to reduce these risks and to, help protect our forests and communities in the future.
Because when I think a lot of people don't understand, when you say federal forest, that means that's Rick Dancer's forest, that's Laura Crow's forest, that's Joshua Ramsdale's forest, that's Laura Crow's, that's all of ours. That's our forest.
It belongs to all of us. You're absolutely right. And these are places where we all love to work and play. And, national forests, for example, operate under a multiple use mandate where these lands are set up for, certainly not only timber harvest, but, recreation, wildlife habitat, and other purposes. One thing that a lot of people don't understand is that really a relatively small portion of these national forests can be managed for things like fuels reduction, timber, and other things. So, we really need to be managing those lands where we can, and make sure that we sustain these resources.
So Casey, let's talk with you. You're with Seneca Family Timber Company. been around. Well, not you. I mean, you're not that old, but your timber company, the family has been around for a long time, managing private timberland. How did this impact you? How did the fire impact your guys' company?
The fires impact us tremendously, and on a number of different ways. Some of them are obvious in their, trees. So as far as our timberlands, we had about 10,000 acres within the perimeters of different of the fires. And so that's important to us for so many ways that people think. But there's other things that I think people would never think of, and that is our wonderful foresters. And they, some of these foresters were out there planting decades ago some of our timberlands that actually burned. And so the morale of what that does for foresters of knowing, my life's work, something I did 25 years ago, 30 years ago, just went up in smoke, I think is really difficult as well. Mm-hmm. And I think even more than that is that our foresters, they don't just manage for timberlands. I mean, that is one of the things they manage for, but other things that are important to any forester, it's in their degree, it's part of what they do, part of their job title, is manage for other things, including wildlife, recreation, cool, clean water, and all of these other benefits. And so those were all affected by the fires as well. So it affected our company in so many ways, but those are the most visceral and close and real ways that they've affected us right now.
So Kevin, you're actually a forester. And correct. You were on both fires, or at least in our area. Tell people what you were doing. I mean, you were out there for over 2 weeks.
Yeah, so after the start of the fires on Labor Day, the first thing we did was, call to action, get everyone together, get a game plan, talk with our foresters, our contractors, loggers, people in the field, and just try to size up what we could do. I mean, these were historic fires, very huge events. So we just got together and started getting a game plan. The state has, a fire team. They start putting things together and put things in place. But behind the scenes, we were getting people ready and people were mobilizing, getting machines out there just to start protecting whatever resources we could.
And you saw what I think most people don't understand is we think, okay, there's these mysterious fire crews out there, but the first people on the scene were right. People like loggers and contract loggers and local people and the fire crews didn't have enough people to work overnight. And so you had locals coming up there probably when they weren't supposed to, up fighting and trying to put out these fires because they care so damn much about this property and this land.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah, there was people out there, not necessarily vigilantes, but just protecting their own property, protecting their neighbor's property. People that had equipment, fire engines, water trucks. We were still within fire season, just doing what they could to stop anything, to put a neighbor's house out, to put water along the highway, dig a fire line. So I mean, it just happened really quick, and people just came together. I mean, these things were so huge on so many fronts. You could only do, what you could do and just come together quickly.
So Shelly, let's bring you in because I don't want you to feel like just the person sitting out here. Shelly Pruitt, tell folks you have you're a timber farmer.
I'm a tree farmer. I have a small woodlot. It's about 43 acres, and I manage it. I have a long-term plan for that, and I also live there. So it's pretty amazing. It's very personal for me, the fire that happened, and my property is very, it's my lifeblood.
So you were kind of lucky in some ways.
I'm extremely blessed with what I've got at post-fire. I lost a lot, but not as much as many. The one thing I did lose were my trees. And I am actively working my management plan for those trees. So today they're being cut and sent to the mill.
So can I ask you a question that because I know this is really personal to you, the trees and what you do with those trees. But Casey kind of told me a story about some lumber that came back. Can you tell people that story? I think that's really cool.
Well, I think it's pretty amazing because people don't understand the life cycle of what happens. It's I have a plan, and I've lived on my place since '86. My husband bought it in '68. So we've had a long-term plan for the trees and the land. That's what we do. Anyway, in 1990, we did an initial log, and then at that point, 2020 was going to be the secondary. They call it a select log. That's what I have a plan for. So anyway, in the first part of this year, started logging, and we took off timber, and we sent it to Seneca and Roseboro. So anyway, when I had to start rebuilding, I didn't lose my home, but I lost about 6,800 square feet of barn and shop. I insisted on buying from one of the two companies I sold my logs to so that I could say I'm rebuilding with my timber. And so through the process, I ended up getting finished 2x12s and 2x6s from Seneca, bought them through Square Deal Lumber Company. And when I popped the straps on the units, they happened to have a date on them of April 11th. And I went and I was all squealy and happy because that was the time frame in which I was logging and sending my logs down the road to Seneca. And sure enough, I went back to my records, and I had a scale ticket. And on that day, one of my loads went through the yard. And so I can literally say that my trees went full circle. So they were grown on my place. They spent their 80 or 90 years there, and now they're going to spend the rest of their life there as my new barn.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that's what people, tree farmers like yourself, and even bigger companies, that's why you're doing what you're doing, is because this is a love affair that you have with this.
Well, one part of the story also is that the barn that burnt down, that was built from reclaimed lumber from the mill that was at Blue River. That now that's where the track sets. That I think it's for the high school track. That land was owned by Aaron Jones. At the time, my husband went and helped tear down some of the buildings and clean it up. And so my old barn was, which it'll never be able to be replaced because it was built with roughs on 3x12s and 2x4s that were actually 3x4.5. So anyway, it has a long life.
So Marie writes on here, what a great story. That's why it's a renewable resource. So let's get a little bit down and dirty here. So I want somebody to explain to me, because I think there's a lot of people that don't understand, is that how a tree is carbon, how it brings carbon in and what it does. So either Nick or Casey, one of the two of you. So everybody out there watching right now, this is your education moment. And it's super important that you understand this because there's a lot of conversation going on out there. And this is really interesting and key. And I think you're going to appreciate this. So go.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll offer is that forests, when they're healthy, are carbon sequestering and storing machines. And, I think could all agree is that, reducing carbon emissions, but also sequestering carbon are solutions to climate change that we all should be looking at. As forests grow, they're sucking in the carbon, and the carbon is being stored in the tree and into the soil. What I think people need to understand is that forests are not static systems. We just can't simply, think that by leaving forests alone, they're going to, sequester and store carbon forever. As we've seen this summer, forests can emit a lot of carbon. when they're unhealthy, when they're on fire, and long after the fire, as trees are left to rot and decay, they emit carbon for generations.
Okay, so hold on, Nick.
They,
Hold on, Nick, real quick. So those trees, if we leave them in the forest just to rot and get bug infested and all that kind of stuff, they're going to release carbon that they're if you cut them up and put them into a house that's a 2x4 or 2x12, they're storing that carbon forever, for the life of that. If you let them burn, then you are putting more carbon into the air, which is isn't that what we're trying to do, is get carbon out of the air for the gases and stuff. Am I being simplistic, or is that true?
No, I think you're right. And, what we have before us is a choice. There was data that I saw, after the severe fires that we experienced, that carbon emissions for wildfires this year have exceeded those from Oregon's transportation and energy sectors combined. And so that gives you a sense of the amount of carbon emissions that are caused by these fires. But, there's a better way. We can, through active forest management, we can, improve the resiliency of our forests, reduce the risks, and basically maximize their ability to sequester carbon. We can also harvest this wood and turn them into wood products, which store carbon basically for the life of those products.
So people that are living in homes built with wood, which is most of us, we are actually doing something right now to help with our environment. By living in a wood house, we are helping the environment.
That's correct. Yeah, everybody, in this conversation, they're sitting in houses that are storing carbon as we speak.
Okay, now let me show you something, Nick, because I didn't know Casey was going to send this, but she did. And this is Mount St Helens. So if you guys kind of explain the picture, what this shows the difference in what happens there, Nick.
Yeah, so what you're seeing are you're seeing two different forest ownerships. The one on the right in that photo with Mount St. Helens in the background, the land on the right is owned by the federal government. The land on the left is owned by a private company. And, you really see sort of, two different approaches to forest management in action. The land on the right, after the blast and after the incredible destruction that occurred, the federal government essentially, left that land alone to regenerate naturally. Whereas on the left-hand side, you saw the range of active forest management, post-fire recovery, reforestation. And as you can see, the forest on the left is green and fulfilling its role, to its property owners, where on the right side, you see a forest that is going to take, generations to regenerate. It'll regenerate. Some forests may not regenerate after a wildfire. Sadly, you're going to see a lot of the land on the right on many of our federal lands because contrary to public belief, the large majority of federal lands will not be recovered. You will not see removal of dead and dying trees. You'll see seas of this dead material, and hopefully those forests come back someday so that our great grandchildren can enjoy them as we did.
Okay, so let me ask kind of it seems like an obvious question. If you've got one forest that is on the side to the right where it was all destroyed, and you just let it sit there, if we really are truly concerned about carbon and helping the environment, wouldn't that be more better management and better for the environment and than to go out and replant? I mean, this seems so normal to me, but wouldn't you want to have more trees to then suck in more carbon, to store it for us? It's a natural process they have, rather than just letting it sit here, because you've got decades before it's ever going to be of any use again in terms of helping the environment with the carbon.
Well, I can just give you some simple math here. For my case, on a very small portion of forest land, 42 acres, I took off, my fallers estimated that they took about 1,200 trees down. Do you know that I'm required by law to replant 10,000?
Wow.
So let's do some math here. So I took away at their harvestable maturity the trees, and I am replanting. I don't know what the math is there, 10-1. So it's going to be a little better filter on my little speck in the world.
So, Shelly, let me ask you this, because you and I talked on the phone the other day in preparation for this. You're surrounded by, at least some size, by fed forest, BLM land.
That's right.
And what they do, like any neighbor, directly impacts the other person. And right. What's your concern about what after we have this fire? You're restoring yours, you're replanting yours, and your neighbor, what are they going to do?
Well, they, according to what my understanding is since it's a BLM preserve, so it's a little bit different than the majority of the lands that they manage, they're going to leave it stand and they're going to study it as a fire, what happens after the fire. Their trees will do what trees do. They'll fall, they'll decay. Some of them will continue to live, but quite honestly, they're past their prime. These trees are past their healthy prime. So a lot of them will just do what they do. The education that'll be gained is great. As a neighbor, I'm going to be kind of discouraged when their trees fall on my 8-10-year-old trees, and one tree can take out 50. So
Nick, let me ask you this. So when trees rot and bugs start infesting them, is that like if I got gophers in my yard, my neighbors really, if I don't do something about it, they're probably going to go to their yard. So do the bugs then start tearing? Bugs aren't just saying, oh, this is the federal forest, we're just going to destroy these trees. They're going to go everywhere, aren't they? Or maybe, Kevin, maybe this is you too. I don't know. You're the forester too. How dangerous is that in the big picture?
So bugs are a major concern. We're against the clock on removing timber from the woods that's burnt and making sure it's viable quality so that we can still use it for lumber. But as it deteriorates and bugs get in, there will be issues, especially with the amount of acres. So basically a population explosion of bugs, huge infestation in numbers, they will turn to green timber or slightly burnt timber. So once they get going, they will continue. They don't know property lines and or boundaries.
So Casey or Nick, do you see the question from Mike Clark?
Yes, and I want to get to that in a second, but I'd love to kind of add to what Kevin's saying first, because
okay, go ahead.
About kind of the federal lands and what happens. So when there's those dead and dying trees and they're left there, they season. And I think we all understand this concept. If you have a wood burning stove, you don't want new wood, you want seasoned wood. So if it's sat there for X amount of time, it gets more and more easy to burn. And so that's what we see on these lands is a lot of times the land burns time and time again because those trees have just been left there standing up or down and they're just seasoning. So they're getting drier and drier. And so as timber companies, we don't want to have neighbors that are the federal government. It's actually really dangerous. I mean, that's like having your house next to the old matchsticks and gasoline factory. You're just like, something's probably going to happen. So anyway, I think it's a really big problem, and like was said before, in this state, there's over 60,000 timberland owners, but annually, on average, one timberland owner accounts for 86% of the ownership of the land burned, and that's the federal government. So this isn't about anything else that's kind of universal. This isn't, an act of God exclusively, unless God's ticked at the U.S. Forest Service. This is about management. And so with that, I'll let Nick take this next question.
Yeah, so, to tackle Mike's question, in the media, folks tend to talk about cost when it comes to forest management. But, two things that I think really loom large in these issues when it comes to federal forest management really is analysis paralysis and the real and even just the perceived threat of litigation when our public land managers, want to do right by the land and do things that, help improve the health of the forest. We're in a situation now where we have public land managers who, they work on these lands every day. They understand the conditions on the ground, and they understand the type of forestry that needs to be done, to improve the health and resiliency of these forests. But we're in a situation where our public lands managers are basically managing paperwork and not forests. It takes too long, and it costs too much money for our public land managers just to develop projects to cut a few trees that help reduce the fuels. And we've seen situations time and again where our public land managers do all the stuff that they need to do the wildlife consultations, meet their compliance requirements under federal environmental laws, and they get sued, and the courts effectively stall these projects. And we've seen really this year many projects that have been stalled that would have reduced fuels actually get burned up. It's really quite sad.
So let me ask you, and since I'm not the brightest cookie in the whole place, I get to ask questions like this, and then sometimes it makes people angry. But so my house was endangered, and I drive up the McKinsey and I see all these people's houses that are burned and gone. And then I think, if we had managed this forest better, could we have prevented this from happening?
Well, I took a defensible stand in June and cleared the trees from behind my house, according to what ODF asked me to do and my homeowner's insurance. And by the way, I took those trees, root wad and all, and donated them to Mackenzie River Trust, and now they're going to make fish habitat. But my house is standing because of that.
Because you just had your plan was you went out and clear cut and took care of what you were going to do for the year.
A few years, no, I select log. I didn't do a clear cut until this cut, but a few years ago, if you remember, we had that great wildfire up. It was east of where this fire is now, up around Tokatee and even further east of that. Anyway, it started me thinking, well, gee, I have this forest land property and my house is right in the middle of it. Well, I took all the suggestions and back to Nick's comment about making a plan to make a plan. That's, I read their information and I was educated, but my house is standing because of proper management. But if people just allow this debris and the trees to stay there, we'll see it over and over and over.
It's going to just keep happening, right?
I believe so. That's one of the reasons why I bit the bullet and I went for a complete clear cut on my place. It wasn't in my plan, but I didn't have a choice at this point. I don't want to sit in a tinderbox.
Todd Stoffel with Timber Unity says, I started hauling burnt logs today. It's heartbreaking seeing the homes that have been burnt down. I drive up there and I see the trees now, and I see that, Nick, I don't remember which one of you guys, because I've talked to all of you, but already the trees, like every day they're going to get, they're degrading. So they're going to be less and less valuable in terms of, and I don't mean value for money. I'm talking value because in Oregon, we also have this little thing called a housing crisis. So here we have all this timber that is made into lumber that creates houses, and we're sitting on it and watching it go. And I don't think the general public understands, number one, this is your trees. This is your land. It's your recreation land. How it's managed, it belongs to us. And second, when your house is almost destroyed or your neighbor's house is destroyed, and you realize that management can help relieve that. We don't have to keep doing this every year. I want to have a say in the conversation, and I think there's a lot of other Oregonians that want in. I'm tired of just listening to the messaging, and I want to know more. I want to be factually educated.
Well, a lot of people say that they want to protect do what you need to do for your grandchildren. Don't they understand that that's what forestry management is about? I may not, at 62, I may not go out and run around in the woods like I did when I was 20, but my grandchildren and great-grandchildren can, if the forest is there and accessible and managed properly.
Because right now, a lot of it has been destroyed, and we're not going to get in there for a long time because it's going to be dangerous.
It'll be too dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to add something if I could, Rick. I think this all touches on a really important point, and that is access. Forest management provides access. And I'm often asked, what has changed? I grew up in Oregon. We didn't have these devastating wildfires, yet, here we are. And, there are a lot of factors, but a big one is on federal lands, there just is not the access that there used to be. On Forest Service lands, for example, nationally, they are decommissioning, 1,000 to 2,000 miles of road every year. That is, not only less access for recreation, but it is less access for firefighters to be able to safely access and contain these fires before they grow out of control. I mean, we saw this issue play out really this year, especially on federal lands, where a fire would ignite on federal lands and would start to pick up strength. But since firefighters weren't sure they'd be able to access and contain the fire, they just basically let it burn. And we've seen the results of several incidents this year. Whereas on the private lands, there is that access, there is those rural roads. Firefighters and first responders could respond quickly and safely. And you see fires just get put out a lot more quickly on private lands for that reason.
What's the reason? Somebody wants to know what's the reason for the decommission of a road?
Well, I think people will make a case that there are ecological reasons that we shouldn't have roads. Historically, there have been concerns about impacts over sedimentation and, things of that nature. Over time, we've improved our science and technology. We are able to build roads and provide access, while minimizing environmental impact. But I think for the most part, when there's a reason, our public land managers make a policy decision that they want to close some roads in the forest. They're getting pressure from special interest groups that, we shouldn't have these roads.
Because if you don't have roads, then you don't have people going in there, and that I'm trying to be careful, but isn't the kind of the misconception is that we're part of the problem, and if we could keep people out of all of this, that the world could just go back and be this forest and nobody ever goes in and does anything, when in fact, I think we've all learned that during something like this, I need to get out into nature and to be out a part of that. And the bottom line is, it's our land. It's our land. You can't tell me that I can't go on it. And we're allowing people to take away things. And I think it's because it sounds better. Oh yeah, that sounds good. But okay, Casey, you're just sitting on the edge of your chair. Go ahead. I want to hear what you have.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, I mean, here in Oregon, first of all, people have been helping to manage the land for eons, and here in Oregon for 10,000 years. And so, interestingly, I think the most amazing thing is the Native Americans that were here managed the land beautifully in some instances. And so it's always been, nature. builds itself around what's there. As for instance, if there's beavers, it reacts and it accounts for that. If there's people, it reacts and it accounts for that. And so we are part of what's in the soup, if you will. We're one of the ingredients that affect the land and have been for so long that nature almost is expected and has, become resilient around that. And so I think that's a really important part to remember. I was communicating with somebody, a tribal representing a tribe, and they were irate that there was this sudden thought from certain folks that we shouldn't manage our land, and somehow to let it go fallow and not manage it was somehow respectful or a good idea. And there's a lot of emotion around that.
Because didn't the Native Americans manage the land?
Absolutely. And I even read one account. I went to the Lane County Historical Society and had my white gloves on, so looked like Mickey Mouse, and got to go through some old stuff. But I read one account of somebody that was a hunter that was traveling basically from what's now California north to, I think, somewhere around Salem. And he said that his horse didn't step on any other color than black for 3 days because the Willamette Valley had been burnt. And so that was an important thing that was done to kind of clear out the space, which was really interesting. But as we're talking about the burning, I would love to ask Kevin. Kevin, you know so much about fire. You're an expert at it, and you study what happens all throughout America. But you're really an expert in what's happened in Oregon. Can you speak a little bit to kind of the sequence of the Biscuit Fire, all those fires that happened in Southern Oregon, and whether they're related?
So going back to the history of fire in Oregon, and obviously this was a historic event with the east winds. The magnitude was tough, but looking back, that Oregon has several different climates. Western Oregon, generally a wetter, Eastern Oregon, a drier climate, but there's also Southern Oregon, Southwest Oregon coast that has a history of fire. So Biscuit Fire and several other large fires in 2005 were catastrophic events, largely in some unroaded areas, not a lot of access. But those fires have still had reburns and just a series of, through the years, it just keeps happening. So, fires are not going away. And to see them in Western Oregon at this magnitude really should be fairly alarming and eye-opening. We've been seeing this in California for the past few years, and you just think, oh, it's drier and it's a little different down there. But everyone really needs to keep their eyes open and know that forest management probably needs to change. We need to take some actions to stop this from happening again, or at least limit what we can.
So Mike Clark has another question. Is a broader swap of private and public lands possible, like Seneca and others did with ONC lands years ago? Give up privately owned rivers and riparian lands for others of lesser ecological value? If not, why not?
Go ahead, Casey.
That met with so many roadblocks. What was interesting is the friendly land swap is what he's talking about. And that idea was so important to, says Seneca, it is, I was going to say my grandpa. And he went all over the state and had town halls and spoke with folks and so forth. And so the concept was, you take timberland, private timberland, and if it's in a space that seems, ecologically, any kind of issues around it, whether it's close to water or what have you, some kind of habitat, that you could swap it for the federal government's land somewhere else that doesn't have those issues. And it would just be what's called a friendly land swap. And it's interesting because I saw him build coalitions of people on both sides saying yes. And yet when it came to it and politics were involved, didn't go through. made sense to both sides if you spoke with them directly. But I don't know why exactly it wasn't able to go through.
So so somebody says global warming. And I don't know, Becky, when you tuned in, but earlier we were talking about that's what trees, there are one of our good defenses against global warming.
I'd like to, if I could add something, I want to add on to something Kevin mentioned. He talked about California, and California in particular, and we're starting to see this in Oregon. California is experiencing an epidemic of tree mortality, and we are seeing this on federal lands in Oregon, where you have wildfire suppression, and then you combine non-management. You have these forests, these very dense forests where you have these trees that are competing for, soil, sunlight, and nutrients. They're not getting what they need, so they're not resilient in the way that they should to be able to withstand natural fire. So we have these weakened forests. They get attacked relentlessly by insect infestations. The situation is made worse by drought. And you have I know in California, you have well over 130 million dead trees. And that's just the ones that they've counted. And, that all creates tinderbox conditions for devastating stand replacing wildfires. And, we're seeing the same conditions. And if we were not managing at least our public lands, if we're not managing them for at least resilience, we're just going to continue to see these conditions and these severe fires.
First of all, Becky, God, you've got beautiful eyes.
She does.
But second of all, I love the question about global warming, and I want to explain something, because this is really, really, really important. So as we kind of covered, when trees grow, they build themselves by absorbing carbon dioxide from the air, and that's what our vehicles emit and what have you. And then they separate that carbon from the oxygen. So they release clean oxygen. We get to breathe it and all that stuff. But they keep that carbon, and that's what they use in a cellular way to build themselves. So literally 50% of the weight of wood is carbon. And so as that tree grows, it's building himself from the carbon from the air. If you were to pot a tree, and when it's 30 years old, you wouldn't really see that the soil level have changed. It's not building itself from the soil. It is building itself from the carbon in the air. That is a lot of carbon. And so it's pulling that carbon from the air and it's putting it into a physical solid form. And then, as we said, when the wood products are made, then that carbon is captured for the lifetime of that wood product. And then in Oregon, we plant 4 more for every one that was harvested. So our industry does something no machine in the world can do, in that it is literally getting that carbon, pulling it from the air, and then banking it in the form of wood products and growing more. What's interesting, and this is important, Becky, as far as the global warming part, in the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it was created by the UN, the United Nations, a long time ago. And so it is the North Star of science in the world on climate change. It has over 120 contributing countries. It is the biggest body of science we have on climate change. And what they say, without exception, is that it is not only important that we plant millions of trees or even billions of trees. That's all necessary, absolutely, yes. It's also important that we use more wood and wood products. And I think that's really important for people to hear, because if you care about the climate and carbon capture, it is really important to be using more wood and wood products.
That is, I'm so glad you remembered that, Casey, because we talked about that earlier. And to me, okay, that's one of those, that's a blow your mind moment when you're going, the tree, I think most people, me until 2 hours ago when we had our first talk about this, I thought that the trees got all that from the ground. I thought that's what made them grow. And so I think, here we have the state, and we're very environmentally concerned and conservation concerned, and we all are. But we have an instrument here that is a natural carbon sequestering instrument, and then it actually has its own storage tank. So we don't need a place like where we store the nuclear waste up in the northern part of the state. We have that stuff all stored. It's all natural, and we need to keep planting that and keeping that going, not letting it get old and just sit there and not be as productive. So we manage a filtering system for our world.
Yes.
How do we get that message out better? Because I think we've lost that. I mean, honestly, I think that you guys, the timber industry and the foresters, they've kind of lost the message because the other folks are pushing different messages. When this is, and it's not a this or that. This is a solution to wildfires. This is a solution to our carbon problem. This is a solution to having an environmentally sensitive world, and yet people still look at it like it's the enemy.
Across the world, we're seeing countries get it. So in France, they just declared that all federal buildings starting, I think, 2 years from now have to be at least 50% timber. And so there's other countries that, oh gosh, what's the United Kingdom's environmental group? Anyway, they're starting to create laws and rules about how much lumber and timber we have to create our buildings with in order to help participate in that carbon capture. I feel like at some point it's got to catch on here, because the whole rest of the world is starting to get this.
So when people are building a new home, you're looking at it like you're actually helping to take care of this problem. You're using this when you're planting forests and trees, and when Shelly's out replanting her, we're all part of this process together. And we need to be working together, like you were talking earlier, Nick, with all the different groups. We need to be working together, not opposing each other. And I really honestly think, I don't know, I think most people want the timberland, the trees, the recreational facility, the clean water. And this is another way to get it, but we keep looking. No, that's this.
Well, the hardest thing is the opportunity cost. So when I was born, there was about 6 billion people on this earth. Within a few years, there's supposed to be 8 billion people. And so the housing demands for that are phenomenal. And when we look at our primary building materials, here are our choices. I don't think the public even understands what that means for us environmentally. So we've got concrete. I don't think people understand that comes from aggregate, and sometimes stream beds are carved out, or whole mountains are brought down in the pursuit of getting that material. I don't think that they get that that's permanent. I don't know that they understand about steel, and that we have to dig clear down into the crust of this earth and create divots so big they can be seen from space in order to get to that ore, and then necessarily smelt it with coal. That's the only thing that'll get it that hot, and then have to transport it to where it needs to be. So more fossil fuels, and those are all, so that's a permanent thing. And I don't even think they know, window. I don't think they know that glass comes from sand anymore. And there's whole sand islands missing in Indonesia, and that upper kind of little bit of Australia where nobody lives. But when you think about then trees, we can use trees to build our housing, and that can regrow. And that becomes an even more beautiful idea of using lumber and wood products.
So Shelly, answer Josh's question. How long should a tree be around before we harvest it?
It should be harvested when it's at its prime. So that could be, it depends on what the ultimate demand would be for that particular tree. Sometimes it's 20 years, sometimes it's 90 years. There are certain trees that are harvested very young so that they can go into paper and pulp and that type of thing. And then my particular trees and what I manage for, because I was given trees that were 40 plus years old, they were for timber or for dimensional lumber. I don't have trees that are suitable for plywood. So that's an open-ended question. You harvest them when they're ripe, just like the tomatoes that grow on the vine.
So let me ask you guys this. I got two things that I almost have to write things down. I'm getting so old I can't remember anymore. But does an old growth tree do more than a bunch of small second growth trees in terms of carbon work and what they do? Or they are like me, and I won't bring you into this, Shelly, but we are the same age, close to it. When we get older, we're not quite as productive as the younger trees. Is that true? I don't know. I'm asking.
I'll take a shot. So older trees, mature trees, store more carbon. Younger trees suck up carbon more quickly. But just because an older mature tree can store more carbon doesn't mean it's going to do that in perpetuity. Trees eventually, die. They either burn up, they start to decay, and they start to release that carbon. So, I think the point that you're hearing that, Casey really eloquently said is that, by actively managing forests, we can have a cycle where, we're sequestering more carbon, we're storing more carbon, we're sustainably harvesting trees and storing that carbon into wood products. And we're, going through that cycle, over and over again, rather than a situation where we're having these, severe, devastating wildfires emitting tons and tons of, carbon dioxide and harmful smoke. Or, we could see the bigger picture and, recognize that, these are all parts of the solution.
So that's kind of the big message here is we have this filtering system. It's a natural system that when it's managed, it works really well. But when we stop managing it, then what happens is you have these fires. So all the work that the trees are doing to sequester that carbon is then released into the air, like we all sat in here with all the smoke and crap in the air for how many days. That's not environmentally sensitive. So we are kind of, man and woman, human, has to be involved in this process now. And because the Native Americans were from the beginning anyway. I mean, we've always been involved in this process.
Yeah,
healthy forest is a managed forest.
What'd you say, Kevin? I want to hear that again.
A healthy forest is a managed forest.
So this is the last thing I'll ask, because I want to try to keep this under an hour so that I can put it on Instagram as well. How important is it that we not just sit here and do nothing, that the general public understand these basic, simple things? And I know many of you are involved in the timber industry, so somebody can go, well, that's that. But I think we've given some really great information tonight for things for people to think of. And this is not a them and us. This is ours. But we, as the people of Oregon, need to be more involved in this process, because we've abdicated our responsibility for years because we've been raising kids and doing things. But now this is starting to this just destroyed the whole McKenzie Valley, and it destroyed Archie, and people's lives have been just devastated. And there's something we can do about that besides sit around and just do nothing.
Well, I think people need to stop and respect each other's opinions, but also make headway and get past the point of button heads about what's right for this organization or that department or this federal government agency or this politician. We need to start looking at the difference between what it's going to take to leave something here productive for our grandkids and great grandkids. The difference in having 43 acres of pasture land, I'm not a scientist, but I know that grass does not absorb as much of the bad things floating out there in the air as my forest land does. So you need to stop and realize that the Willamette Valley has a lot of grassland, so that's managed. Let's manage our forests the same. Let's do what we can do to help everybody. We're not selfish. We're not doing this just for us. we're doing it for everybody.
So Nick, would you address Matt? He would love to get some consumable data points and informational graphics to be able to share with people in conversations.
Sure.
And
well,
you just happens to have an organization that can help you, Matt.
Yeah, Matt, I see you're on Facebook. So Healthy Forests, Healthy Communities are on Facebook. You'll see a lot of that type of good stuff. Every day we post something, pretty interesting about forest management, wildfire, and solutions. So I encourage you to check that out. Look up healthyforest.org and you'll find more information there. Just real quickly, my parting shot is, Kevin is the expert. Our public lands managers are the experts. They've dedicated their lives to growing healthy forests. Our public land managers in particular shouldn't be managing paperwork. They should be out doing their jobs, managing the forests, making sure that these forests continue to provide all the benefits that we expect from these ecosystems. So rather than having them spend all their time doing paperwork out of fear of getting sued, let's untie their hands, let them apply the science and technology, and let's have healthy forests and all those good things.
So Matt, next time you go sell a house, just tell them they need an extra bedroom because they'll be doing more for the environment. And then if they only get a 3-bedroom, they should get a 4. I could see that fun conversation. Casey, anything else you want to part with?
Oh, I know you're quick for time. My one concern for the people specifically that live up the McKinsey is a concern about the Ben and Doris park up there. My concern is if we don't manage it, then it's going to be shut down for public access because it'll be unsafe. And so we'll lose yet another place that we could have played. If we don't get those trees out of there within the next couple of years, we're probably not going to be able to access that land. It won't be open to the public for the next 100 years. So. Okay. But more than that, thank you, Rick.
God, you guys, Kevin, thank you. Casey, you picked the perfect cruise because we had a little bit of everything and everybody kind of led into each other. You guys, thank you so much for being here and doing this and taking your time to explain this. We're not done with this conversation. There's going to be more, folks, because we're just starting on this issue because there's a time we have to get in. I'll finish that with them. You guys, I'm going to take you off the screen and let you guys go. Thank you so much for being here and taking your time and driving down to do this. Okay, you guys, this is how it works. You know how I am. To be in a community is an action word. That means we have to do something. To be part of a place and we have to be involved. We can no longer stand by and allow others to own the message. We have to get involved because it is our land. 60% of that land, that federal land, that belongs to you and me. So why are we not a part of how that is managed and what we want done? And I am going to be super selfish. I was scared to death I was going to lose my home, and I drive up the McKinsey and I see that, and I don't think that had to happen. And I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen again. So it is time to get off your butt and get involved in the conversation. Doesn't mean anybody else is wrong. It means this is a solution and we have a filtering system that can work. And I want to see why this isn't part of the process. And that's the end of the story. Good night.